Hello, and welcome to today's live reading of The Sweet Temptations Trilogy by L.M. Mountford, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Richard Martin always hated Holmes and Rain's Christmas parties. The decor reminded him of a cheap Hammer horror set. The atmosphere was reminiscent of a funeral. And worst of all, they were organized in August and hosted in early November. Each year, the bosses would present a laundry list of reasons for the premature celebration, but everyone knew those were merely a smokescreen devised to mask the fact that it cost considerably less to hold a Christmas party before December. Frankly, Richard wondered why they bothered even holding a party, or for that matter, made attendance mandatory. Suddenly pushing up his left sleeve cuff, he checked his watch for what felt like the 100th time. To his utter disgust, the digital display indicated that it was just 10:03 p.m. The party would go on for at least another hour, maybe even two. God forbid. The dining hall of the Cheltenham Premier Inn was a hive of color and light as the value disco ball fitted to the ceiling pelted the chamber with light beams, and the speakers blared out a stream of Christmas hits from the 90s. The walls were decorated in red and white. Mistletoe hung on strands of crimson silk, and an artificial Christmas tree stood in the center of the room beside a folding table heavily laden with snacks and refreshments. The guests appeared jubilant and festive as they reveled in small groups evenly spaced around the cavernous chamber, mirroring the groups that clung together around the office's coffee and tea machines. They were garbed they were garbed elegantly in suits and dresses, a facade of wealth and importance that was as phony as their smiling faces. God, he needed a drink. Resisting the urge to check his watch, Richard got up from his assigned seat and moved into the crowd, the wooden soles of his shoes clapping loudly on the tiles as he weaved a path between the mingling bodies, nodding politely at anyone who noticed him towards the overloaded folding table. There were ample snacks and refreshments, Asda's finest, diced sausage rolls, cocktail sausages, crisp biscuits, fruit and cheese on cocktail sticks, mini pizzas, and even some slices of chocolate sponge, all laid out in white china bowls and saucers around two large bottles of Jacob's Creek and honeyed Jack Daniels, as well as a jug of iced orange squash. Two high towers of styrofoam cups had been erected between the bottles. Taking the cup on the top of the tower, he contemplated the wine for a moment, tempted to pour a drink, but then thought better of it. Alice would kill him if she found out. Grumbling inwardly, he mournfully poured himself a squash. The wine was probably vinegar anyway, he reasoned, before twisting to take another look around the room while sipping the fruity beverage. He glimpsed Stacy Stevens, a pretty part-timer in the firm's mailroom with long raven black hair and milky skin, nervously edging through the crowd in her black lacy dress and flat-bottom shoes, somehow seeming even more uncomfortable than him amongst the revelers. Nearby, he saw Mark McLean, his office colleague and friend, and his wife Rachel, deep in conversation with another couple he didn't recognize. And deepest amidst the Denzians, the firm's MD, Derek Holmes, was conversing with the heads of departments and grinning broadly as he took long swigs from a monogrammed silver and crocodile leather hip flask. Silver-haired, rosy-faced, and with the frame of a barrel wrapped in Armani, Derek was the very embodiment of opulent living, and Richard could only hope that the man didn't notice him, for he was awfully fond of mocking and belittling anyone whom he considered beneath him. Fortunately, the four department heads seemed to be commanding the full wrath of the director's humor, and he failed to notice the lowly bookkeeper standing beside the refreshments. Alas, there was no sign of Alice amidst the sea of faces, but neither, thankfully, could he see. Well, 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 look who we have here, an all too familiar voice said silkily. Buck. Throwing his head back, Richard drained the cup in a single swig before placing it back on the table and turning, slowly, around to be confronted by the vision of his supervisor, Scarlett Holmes, standing before him. Strikingly beautiful, with soft features and sun-kissed skin, her hair was long, wavy tresses of honey blonde that reached down to her shoulders. Clad in a dark blue pencil dress that went well with her almost unnaturally bright baby blue eyes and clung to her slender figure, the low cut V neckline offering a tantalizing glimpse of her ample cleavage. She would have seemed utterly radiant if he hadn't known the beauty was only skin deep. Hi, Scarlett, he said nervously before flashing her a smile. He was certain Stevie Wonder would have seen through. Enjoying the party? Hmm, she purred, watching him with a wicked amusement that Richard wasn't sure he liked. Then again, he rarely knew how to feel around Scarlett Holmes. Though she'd only been 23 and barely out of university when she joined the firm, she was also the CEO's daughter and had leapt over the heads of a dozen more highly qualified employees to get the accounting supervisor's position. What made it all the worse was, unlike the stereotypical cliche of ditzy boss's daughter, Scarlett actually knew her trade. Despite having an attitude that constantly swung from aggressive to flirtatious, she had genuine business acumen as well as a knack for people and figures. She was ambitious and worked tirelessly to ensure that she and her people regularly went above and beyond. Thanks largely to her efforts, they were now the top performing team in the firm, and rumor had it she was about to be promoted to the head of accounts department. However, there were also whispers. Rumor had it that she'd had numerous affairs with more than half the firm's employees, many of whom were happily married. For his part, Richard preferred not to put stock in the storm of office gossip that followed wherever she went, but in one thing, at least, the rumors were true. She was a real tight ass. Where's your wife? I haven't seen her. Is everything all right between you two? Oh, his eyes flickered towards the door leading out of the hall into the building's main foyer, hoping against hope to see his wife sashaying towards them. Alice just stepped out for a minute. She had to take a call but couldn't hear herself over the music. His tongue darted out to moisten his dry lips. She should be back any minute now, and he hoped that was true. The words sounded hollow to his ears, sounding foreign and unfamiliar, and he suddenly had the feeling of being trapped as he realized just how close they were, her curvaceous body all but pitting him against the table. So, how's your father? He looks like he's enjoying himself. He gestured with a nod over her shoulder, and Scarlett twisted to take a look back across the hall to where her father was telling a very animated story. At the sight of a short and portly man with thinning red-gray hair, Richard had been around the office a few times, but had never been introduced to, standing a few paces away. She made only a token effort to cover her laugh with a cough. With a face such a deep shade of red it was almost purple, watching the inside of his cup so intently, clearly determined to look anywhere but at his immediate superior, the tomfoolery could only have been at his expense. Well, you know Daddy, always happy so long as there is a drink in his glass and minions to torment. It was meant as a joke, and Richard tried to match her gleeful chuckle, but his heart just wasn't in it, and he could tell she saw through the facade. Suddenly, her playfulness evaporated. When she turned back, the stern mask that so often watched him like a hawk whenever he handed in his report suddenly glared up at him with eyes as cold and hard as diamonds. The shift was so abrupt, it almost gave him vertigo. He has his eye on you. Me? Swallowing the knot suddenly rising in his throat, he forced himself to hold her gaze, fighting the impulse to glance towards the director. The urge was like burning fishing lures hooked into his eyes, tugging insistently, and he fully expected to spy the managing director shooting him a glare, the mirror image of his daughters. But why? What the hell would Walrus Face want with him? The Prometheus account, Scarlett supplied by way of explanation, arching one perfectly plucked eyebrow, full pink lips pulled tight into an almost indefinable line. Prometheus was a London-based construction and land developments company that had several branches throughout the continent and, according to their books, also had contracts in parts of Central America, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Though it was not exactly an uncommon practice for big organizations to outsource their accounts. Indeed, Holmes and Rain had more than a dozen such contracts. There was no question that the Prometheus account was a big deal. Rumor had it that Derek Holmes had superseded two department heads to ensure his daughter received the account. With explicit instructions, it was to be given top priority. Whether that was true or not, she, in turn, had called Richard into her office and instructed him to delegate his workload around the rest of the team. She wanted Prometheus to be his sole concern. Everything she was Everything else was to go on the back burner. So he had. She'd also told him to have it done ASAP. That had been 3 weeks ago, and the reports were still stashed on the flash drive he kept locked away in his desk drawer. He swallowed the knot in his stomach, leaping sickeningly into his throat. He should have known. Hell, he should have given her that damn USB last week. Withholding it had been stupid. For all the weight laid on his shoulders, it hadn't taken him long at all to sort and organize and check Prometheus's accounts. It was such easy work, a trained chimp could have been up to the task. Their records were meticulous and immaculate, the numbers perfect, and with the pressure to finish the job, the importance of the contract to the company, and the fact his performance review was upcoming, withholding the data was more trouble than his job's worth. Withholding it had been very stupid, but Richard couldn't help himself. In his 12 years in accounting, he had never seen anything like it, and that irked him. He couldn't put his finger on what. The numbers were just too perfect, or too perfect to be genuine. Of course, it wasn't any concern of his. He wasn't an analyst. It wasn't his job to sort out conundrums. He just kept the client's books. When he was done, he sent reports to Scarlett with notes about his concerns and recommendations, if any. But in this, he couldn't help himself. It almost felt like there was a challenge hidden amidst the sheer mass of paper and data, of piles of receipts, invoices, and spreadsheets. Something secret only he could see. Hidden, waiting, daring him to find it. So he'd begun to dig, looking deeper, trying to solve a mystery that common sense screamed didn't exist, but that the small voice in the back of his mind refused to let go. Like some naughty schoolboy playing truant to go on a great adventure to the land of Narnia. Sooner or later, though, the boy needed to go back through the wardrobe, and if the managing director had his eye on Richard, so far, every money trail had turned up empty, and by itself, mere professional curiosity wasn't worth losing his job over. Or, worse still, becoming the next punchline in one of Walrus Face's jokes. Baleful blue eyes glared up at him, chunks of blue ice burning bright against a sea of soft beauty. Richard forced a small, reassuring smile. I'll have them on your desk Monday. Good. That single word was like a storm passing to unveil sunbursts. She beamed with the radiance, her golden skin lighting up with a warmth that chased any hint of chill away as those luscious pink lips curled into a smile. See that you do, or else I might just have to give you a spanking, she winked. Richard gawped, not sure whether to believe his own ears. Had she really just said that? To anyone who might have glanced their way, the gesture would have appeared innocent. Yet her eyes lost none of the intensity as she watched him, and her playful tone sent a warm, involuntary shiver coursing up his spine. What the fuck? He remembered all the stories he'd heard people at work gossiping about the people who'd told them and the wide range of vague, outlandish details that seemed to grow more and more extraordinary with each retelling. It was all hearsay, mostly just the petty vindictiveness of someone who'd been put out, or thought her job should have been theirs, or just the usual rambling talk that always seemed to blossom around a famous name. There had never been any proof, and until now, Richard had barely given them much thought, but that look in her eyes made him ready to believe every word. He'd seen it on the cats he sometimes saw stalking city streets on his morning drive to work. There was the same confidence, the same purpose, and hunger. She watched him the way a stalking cat would observe a bird pecking in the mud, utterly fixed in its own world and ripe for the plucking, and the thought had him instinctively averting his gaze. Whatever this game was, he didn't want a part of it. However, knowing she was waiting for him to say something, he opened his mouth to agree, but the words that should have come caught in his throat, and all he could do was nod in acknowledgement. Heat blossoming across his cheeks, he swallowed. His mouth so dry, it felt like forcing down a lemon. God damn it, he needed a drink. Her eyes flashed, victorious fire dancing over cool blue eyes. Then, as if only just realizing she was making him uncomfortable, her smile faltered for a moment and turned apologetic. Ah, don't worry, Dick, I was only kidding. She cooed like he was a small child or a pet dog. I think you better have another drink. If your face gets any redder, they might mistake you for Rudolph and hang you on the wall. She giggled, the sound all girlish and mocking. It's already a rather striking likeness, maybe with a pair of antlers. More relieved than embarrassed by her dismissal, Richard turned back to the refreshments before Scarlett had finished speaking. With the styrofoam cup still in hand, and grateful for some much needed space between him and the teasing wench, he reached out for the jug of squash. To his horror, the hand was shaking. No, God, get a grip, man. Don't let her get to you. As if she knew his thoughts, Scarlett stepped in close enough for him to inhale her perfume, something sharp and expensive. Here, let me, she offered, brushing his hand aside. She seized the handle and, despite it being almost full, raised the jug one-handed, with a slight pivot to her hips to face him. She filled his cup almost all the way to the top, her gaze unwavering, boring into his with that look of predatory glee, seeing through him, into him. It was unnervingly similar to the look Alice shot him whenever she suspected he was up to something. There, she put the jug down before finally breaking the contact to give the drink a quizzical look. Just orange? You don't want to mix it with something a little stronger? No, thanks. I'm driving. Barely able to get his tongue around the words, Richard had to fight the urge to immediately knock the drink back. Fuck, where the hell was Alice? What could Samantha have to say that couldn't wait for tomorrow? He looked down at the orange in his cup, wished, though he'd never been much of a drinker, that it would be something fermented, and added under his breath without thinking, Alice would kick my ass if she found out I'd been drinking. The moment he'd said them, he regretted the words. Beaten, he surrendered and chucked the juice back in almost one big gulp. It was deliciously refreshing and eased the knots in his gut in a single rush of watered citrus. Oh, mirth lit up Scarlett's eyes. Well, isn't someone a slave driver? Come on, Dick, I promise I won't tell. She teased playfully, reaching for the honeyed Jack Daniels. Richard struggled not to grin at the impish mischief on her face. No, it's fine. I don't really like mixing drinks anyway. She feigned a pout that had no doubt melted her daddy's heart more than once. It had the effect of making her look so serenely demure and girlish. He might have been convinced she was sincere if not for the wild glint in her eyes. It was a sinful look on her, the perfect melding of innocence and wicked. All that was missing was an Ann Summers costume, probably a nurse or a cheerleader's uniform.